Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Here is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. We start from South Africa, and a provincial government in South Africa plans to spend 1.2 billion rands, that is equivalent to 66 million US dollars, to build a solar farm in order to shield itself from the country's energy crisis, a local media is now reporting. Gauteng's Premier Panyaza Lesufi said this was part of the province's plan to generate its own electricity and lessen its dependence on the state power firm Eskom. The state electricity company has been grappling with energy shortages in recent times, with up to 10 hours of scheduled power cuts on a daily basis. An independent United Nations human rights expert has accused the Central African Republic's armed forces and their Russian allies, the Wagner Group, of multiple rights abuses after a 10-day visit to the CAR Yao Agbete, whose Togolese called on the government to investigate allegations of summary executions and disappearances leveled against the Russian mercenaries, particularly in Mambere Kadai Prefecture. The group is reported to be exploiting gold reserves there. Mr. Agbete also said the Russians and the military were obstructing the United Nations mission in the country, something he called unacceptable. They have not yet commented on these allegations. We go to Tunisia, and the authorities in Tunisia have summoned the head of the main opposition party for questioning. The Islamist El Hadar party said its leader, Rashid Ghannouchi, had been asked to present himself at the police in the capital, Tunis. Police have arrested several prominent figures critical of President Kais Saied in recent weeks. They include a senior El Hadar politicians, the head of an independent radio station, an influential businessman, and 2 judges. President Saied, who dissolved parliament in 2022, before rewriting the constitution, says his actions are necessary to save Tunisia from chaos. His critics have denounced the moves as an anti-democratic coup. And then the latest from this chaos in the Anglican Church, and 12 Anglican Church leaders have announced they no longer consider the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, to be the lead of the Global Communion after his decision to allow blessings for gay partnerships. The leaders, who say they represent 75% of Anglicans worldwide, accuse the Church of England of having taken the path of false teaching and going against the historical biblical faith. They include the primates of South Sudan, Uganda, Congo, Alexandria, and Egypt. Alexandria in Egypt. Blessings for same-sex civil partnerships were approved by the Church of England's Legislative Assembly, the General Synod, earlier this month. The Archbishop of Canterbury has said he appreciates the bishop's stance, but no structural changes to the Anglican Communion could be made without his consent. Very well. Okay, and we head over back to Tunisia again, and President Kais Saied has ordered Europe's top trade union official to leave the North African country after she addressed protesters at a demonstration organized by an influential labor union. Authorities accused Esther Lynch, the Irish General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, of making statements that interfered with Tunisian internal affairs during a Saturday protest against Saied in the port city of Sfax. Tunisia's General Labor Union, or UGTT, organized the demonstration to protest a crackdown on the increasingly authoritarian president's political opponents and his critics in the media, judiciary, business community, and trade unions. In an address to the protesters, Lynch demanded the release of union leader Anis Kaabi, who was arrested by security forces last month. She called on the Tunisian government to negotiate with the UGTT leadership to improve the economy, which has tottered on the brink of bankruptcy amid political instability that deepened after a parliamentary election last month in which only 11% of voters cast their ballots. We go to Ivory Coast, and the French Minister of Armed Forces, Sébastien Lecornu, in Abidjan, welcomed the evolution of the Ivorian army over the past 10 years during an official visit to the Ivorian commercial capital, Abidjan. He declined to comment on Burkina Faso's recent decision, even as Syria emphasized France's commitment to engagement with security issues in West Africa. While the Islamist insurgency is spreading, France's defense minister pledged on Monday to boost military support to Ivory Coast as Paris adjust its strategy in West Africa after neighboring Burkina Faso ordered French troops to leave. French President Emmanuel Macron is due to visit sub-Saharan Africa in early March, though he is expected to steer clear of former French colonies in the Sahel. And then we go to an agreement that was made between DRC and Zambia over the sidelines of the African Union summit that happened over the weekend. The president of the DRC and Zambia have vowed to resolve customs delays for trucks transporting copper. From the two top producers in Africa, the growing demand for electric vehicles has fueled a race for the copper and cobalt used in their batteries. But truckloads of the key metals have been stuck at the border. Angry truck drivers call for customs to speed up clearances at the border after meeting this month among officials of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. Some of the drivers from Southern and Eastern Africa have been parked in kilometers-long line at the border for weeks. They're waiting to deliver goods into the DRC and to take the valuable metals out. Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema and DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi discussed the border problem on Saturday on the sidelines of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And we go to the DRC, and some opposition candidates in the Democratic Republic of Congo have raised their alarm over delays and alleged irregularities in voter registration drive that they say is being conducted to their disadvantage ahead of a general election in December. Over 50 million Congolese voters are meant to be registered by March the 17th, but the Cheney Election Commission on Friday said an unspecified number of centers in the first registration zone of 10 provinces, that includes the capital Kinshasa, had missed an interim deadline that had already been extended for 25 days. An internal Cheney document seen by Reuters showed that 779 of the first zone's 9,200 registration centers were closed or not operational as of February the 1st, and only 52% of focus voters were registered. Alleged irregularities, including faulty voting machines and delays opening some polling stations, marred the last presidential vote in 2018, which Fayulu still claims he won by a landslide. That is Martin Fayulu, the official opposition leader in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he and fellow candidate Moise Katumbi told Reuters that they believe that Cheney, which is the Electoral Commission of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the abbreviation Cheney is in French, was prioritizing registering voters in areas loyal to President Felix Tshisekedi, like his home region of Kasai. And then we go look at the latest from Nigeria, even as the country prepares for its elections on Saturday. And a court in Nigeria has dismissed a lawsuit that sought to allow Nigerians to vote outside the country in the February 25th election for president. The ruling means millions of Nigerians living abroad will have to return if they want to exercise their democratic right. Nigerians abroad contribute billions of dollars per year to the economy through remittances, and supporters say the constitution should be amended so they can vote. The court dismissed the lawsuit, citing the constitution, which states that only registered voters residing in Nigeria have the right to vote. The lawsuit by two Nigerians living in Britain sought to hold the February 25th election until millions of diaspora voters were included. The government in 2017 estimated 17 million Nigerians live abroad, though not all of them are 18, the legal age to vote. The court's ruling in February 15th agreed that Nigerian diaspora should be able to vote, but that it was for lawmakers to decide, not the courts. Nigerians living abroad had hoped to cast their ballots for president at Nigerian embassies and consulates. Despite their contribution to Nigeria's growth, diaspora have struggled to get support for voting from abroad. Nigerian lawmakers a year ago voted against a bill to allow diaspora voting. And then we head over to South Sudan, and the high-level standing committee on the peace roadmap implementation will on Tuesday clarify to the public how the 2-year extension will commence and be implemented, the National Cabinet Minister has said. Dr. Martin Elia Lamuru said the body tasked with overseeing the implementation of the extended peace roadmap has considered what he termed a misunderstanding on the extension of the transitional period. When reporters asked what the confusion was all about, Dr. Elia declined to comment on the issue. However, he said the matter will be explained by the committee at a press conference in Juba, and that is supposed to be happening today. And Dr. Martin was speaking to journalists at his office in Juba yesterday. In November 2022, parties to the unity government extended the transitional period for 24 months until December 2024, when elections are expected to usher in a new government. The pending tasks of the peace agreement include reviewing the new National Elections Act to conform to the permanent constitution. Others are the enactment of the Political Parties Act 2022, the National Constitutional Review, conducts of civic education on the permanent constitution, and the deployment of the unified forces, among others. And then we go back to Nigeria again. At least 8 Nigerian police officers have been killed in separate attacks by suspected rebels in the country's southeast, just days ahead of the presidential elections. The killings come as more than 90 million people are registered to vote this Saturday to elect a successor of Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, who is stepping down after 2 terms in office. 4 officers were killed in an attack on a police station in Anambra State on Monday. Local police spokesperson Tochoku Ikenga said while authorities are searching for suspects in the killing of 4 other police officers in 2 separate attacks over the weekend. Police have blamed the attacks on the indigenous people of Biafra, the IPOB, which is fighting for the independence of the ethnic Igbo group in the southeast of Nigeria. The IPOB and its armed wing, the Eastern Security Network, have denied responsibility for the frequent attacks in the region. The violence has stoked fears about the ability of Nigeria's security forces to protect voters as at the polls this weekend. And the latest from Mali is that the former rebel group in northern Mali on Monday launched joint military operations against Islamic State group militants that have killed hundreds of local residents and displaced thousands. French public broadcaster RFI is now reporting the groups under the Permanent Strategic Framework have also declared war on the recently launched alliance between Al-Qaeda-linked Support Group for Islam and Muslims, JNIM, and a section of coordination of movements of the Azawad, who claim to jointly fight IS. The CSP have pledged their allegiance to Mali's transitional authorities and have downplayed reports of tensions between the groups and the armed forces. And about 380 vehicles and nearly 2,500 men have been mobilized by the groups, which with an aim of defending the region against jihadists who have been accused of carrying out deadly attacks against civilian targets, according to the report. The coalition decided to launch joint operations after FAMA and Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group failed to take part in operations against the IS militants despite their presence in Meneka Gao region. It added that the armed groups will also be pursuing other objectives in the search for peace and stability in northern Mali, including joint patrols. And that is the latest from across the continent of Africa. Now, Mali is one of the countries that has been struggling with the issue of insecurity and extremist activity in that country that has made it to be quite insecure, together with some other countries across the Sahel region. And Mali just severed ties with France, which was helping it to fight these jihadist activities, and they welcomed the use of the Wagner group, this mercenary group from Russia. But since they've been there, the security has not really improved. So there has been a rise of attacks. Mali, Burkina Faso, and these other places that this group is across Africa. So now what is more worrying, adding to an already bad situation that will make this cocktail not very good in terms of the stability of the country, is now former rebel groups. These are rebel groups, have now formed, part of northern Mali is dominated by a lot of rebel groups, including the Tuaregs. They formed a group and they've been trying to, impose. They're also they're extremist as well, and they have been fighting to have a country that is ruled and based on strict Sharia laws. So that is the thing that has been happening. And of course, these operations and these extremism activities, together with others in different countries in the Sahel, this war have morphed, and it's now become a lot of other litany of issues that they're fighting for and they're fighting about. But among top things that these militant groups are fighting is the Western education in these countries, and they want a country that is led through Sharia law, strict Sharia laws, and they are opposed to democratic process, the Western democracy. Let me just put it that way. So this has been three fundamental issues that we see them fighting for or against in these different countries that we have these extremist groups, but now on top of other issues again. So it becomes very complicated. Sometimes you don't even know what exactly they're fighting about, or they're fighting for, or they're fighting against. And what worries me now is that these former rebel groups, I'm even careful to use the word former, they've now joined hands, and they've launched a joint military operation against the Islamic State group militants, the IS, that has been causing this insecurity. There's different other groups in Mali, just as there are in Nigeria. Of course, the dominant terrorist group there is Boko Haram, but we have other modes of insecurity and other modes of militant activities ongoing. The people who are committing this, the banditry, those who are kidnapping people for ransom and things like that. So just different aspects of that contributes to the greater insecurity in Nigeria, the same as in Mali. And now they've launched a joint military operation against this group, and they are working with the government, with the forces now. Mali is under the military junta, and they formed a group under the permanent strategic framework. So they formed a very strategic group called the Permanent Strategic Framework, and they have declared a war on the recently launched alliance between the Al-Qaeda-linked support of Islam and Muslims and a section of coordination of movements of the Azawad who aim to jointly fight IS. So it's quite something. It's quite something. They're having an alliance with other militants group, I think, who differ in terms of their agenda and also what it is that they're fighting about. So maybe these are the moderate extremists, I don't know, but they're trying to come together to fight against the IS group in Mali, and they've pledged their allegiance to Mali's transitional authorities. Now I'm wary. And they've not only done that, but, they're saying, just reading through this story, the coalition has decided to launch a joint operation after FEMA. This was an operation that was put together to fight against these extremists, and the Russian mercenaries have failed to take part in the operation. So the Russian mercenaries who are in Mali, who are supposed to come to Mali and help Mali in fighting the insurgency, they refused to work with these former rebels to fight against the Islamic State, so they're not interested. And since these mercenaries started their operations in Mali, the situation as far as the security has not really improved. So they're not doing what they had maybe promised the Malian military junta that they will be doing when they came into the country. Instead, they have been busy. They have been busy with other activities, as we shall see in another story, this Russian mercenaries. So they have refused to join these now repented former rebel groups or former extremist groups who have come together and go fight these Islamic State militants. So they added that the armed groups will also be pursuing other objectives. Now, this is the caveat. And if the military in Mali is not very clear of what other objectives this team wants to pursue outside of working with them to go after the Islamic State groups, then this is where it gets murky. Because they're saying we're not just here to help the government fight this deadly group. We're not just here offering our services for this country for free like that. On top of that, of trying to fight these Al-Qaeda linked groups, we are also here to pursue other objectives in the search for peace and stability in northern Mali, including joint patrols. Now, other objectives is what I need to understand. I've seen this kind of strategy and method being used in Somalia, but I think that is different. These are also rebels. These are also members who I guess used to be part of these groups which are extremists, I suppose. But them working with the government now to try to stabilize Mali, that makes me quite wary. And I was just trying to do a parallel there with what is happening in Somalia, and you've seen that is one strategy that President Mahmoud has employed, and it has sort of helped in the fight against Al-Shabaab, where they're engaging local militia groups, not local civilians, not local youth groups, not local people who have been briefed and empowered and are working with the government to come to help fight Al-Shabaab, but local militia groups. So a militia group is a militia group is a militia group is a militia group. Whichever way you want to look at it, and however you think it's helping, and whichever form it comes, being wrapped as, it is a militia group. And as this group now in Mali is saying, they have their agenda and they have their objectives, and they have the reasons why they formed this militia group in the first place. So in Somali's case, I've always argued, as much as their help and the involvement in fighting the Al-Shabaab is sort of helping in bearing some fruits, of course, and civilian involvement and community involvement basically has really helped in this fight against Al-Shabaab in Somalia. But once this war, maybe to some large extent, is won, and Somalia is somewhat stable, which I think is the prayer all of us have, then now this group might turn out to say, okay, fine. So now what's there for us? So they might go back to the initial agenda that made them become a militia group all the same. And now the government has to solve another insecurity problem that they might have created when they thought they were solving one. They might have been creating another problem that might come to haunt them later in the future. You cannot engage these militant groups. You cannot engage extremist groups in trying to fight, extremism. That's a problem right there. It might look like the best solution presently, but if you look in the future, because I'm assuming even these groups in Somalia, for them to successfully fight Al-Shabaab, then the government, even for these extremist groups that are now saying are going to work with the military junta, then the government has to share enough information, intelligence information on where to go, how to get these people, has to sort of cooperate with them. And in that, they might end up learning or getting their hands into some information that they're not supposed to. Because if you're working with the government and it is matter security, it's quite sensitive. But in the process of wanting this thing to be successful, you might forced to share some intelligence information or some high-level information that shouldn't be in the hands of militants. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you end up arming them and equipping them with information so that they might use against the same government that they're helping, because they're not trained like the military in a country. They don't have the discipline, they don't have the capacity to operate within structures that the military is able to operate within. And that's why we call them the disciplined forces, because they must have some level of discipline that comes with them serving in these positions. For them to handle properly the security operators in a country. A militant group or a former rebel group, they don't have this level of discipline. They don't have this level of even patriotism. For heaven's sakes, they've tried fighting this government before. How repentant do you think this group is? And especially for Mali, there's several rebel groups and these extremist groups there that they've been fighting within themselves because there's no agreement. There's several others in northern parts of Mali. And maybe because the others are more powerful than them, and they've not been able to fight or to run the agenda, and the others overrode them with their agenda. So now they've crawled back and perhaps even pretending to be wanting to work with the government, but at the end of the day, they could be here wanting to meet their end goal and their agenda as to why they were even engaging in these rebel activities. Maybe my journalistic mind is just thinking way too much, but also these are possibilities, and I want to believe that these governments that choose to use these kinds of strategies really think about it very, very carefully, so that you don't look like you are trying to solve a solution today without you knowing that the methods and the strategies that you are using to solve that problem could be potentially be creating more problems in the future for the country. So I would urge the government, this military junta in Mali, to just be very, very careful, even as they engage with these former rebels in northern Mali, who said that they will be launching a joint military operations against the Islamic State group, militants IS, that have killed hundreds of residents and displaced thousands. And that is according to the French public broadcaster RFI. So they are really, really struggling. And this is the point why I want to ask, where are the Russian mercenaries who came to fill in the gap that France was going to leave after they decided that they were going to pull out their troops? And I think I was talking about this in the morning, must have been a dare. But Mali, because of the presence of the Russian mercenaries, I think was quite emboldened and took the dare and, matter of fact, hastened that exit for France by giving them ultimatums and all that. So they don't have that, the France troops that had been in the country trying to help with insecurity. But the presence of the Russian mercenaries, what difference has it made as far as stabilizing these regions that have been restive for a while now? What are they doing? Why are we still having soldiers being killed? Like I was telling in the morning, over 51 soldiers were killed a few days ago in Burkina Faso, just a day before there was a handing over, and the French troops in the country left the country. The ceremony happened on Saturday, and they'd been there under the Barkhane sort of initiative that had brought together several countries in the Sahel region to try and fight these Islamist militants. So we have to ask these questions. What are these Russian mercenaries doing in Mali? Why are they not being able to contain? Why, for instance, are they not willing to work with these other groups and help them in terms of, laying out strategy and just fighting these militant groups? What is their agenda in Mali? What is their agenda in Central African Republic? What is their agenda in Burkina Faso? What are they doing? What is their end goal? And these are questions even this country must ask themselves. They can't be blind to all this information that is just out there about this group. I hope they sit down and think about it, do their research, ask questions, and see if at all this deal is good for them. And as I have stated here before, I do understand their discontent with France. You know, France and its former colonies, it's a whole history, and it's very complicated, and it's very biased, and it's quite, so I do understand their discontent with France, and the help that France perhaps was giving, which they felt was not enough. But you can't solve a problem by creating what seems to be more problem. That is not how that is supposed to be working. And if you felt that you could handle your own security, then you should go ahead and handle your own security. And the issue of security is the reason why you disposed your president. All this outside of Sudan, it's a different case. But Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, yeah, the reason why you removed your presidents is because there was the issue to do with insecurity. You know, these extremist activities that have been ongoing in the Sahel region. But even having disposed all these leaders, nothing has changed. And your new partners don't seem to do much in terms of helping you in that regard. So what is the purpose of these unions that you've entered with these new partners? Are you solving the problem, or you're creating more problems for your countries? And long after you were gone, you know, before you realize it, you would have had other things to try to clean up. So these are things that they have to think about and see, even as they seek to get help from different players and actors across the world. They must interrogate the intentions of these people who are very quick and willing to offer them, to lend them support. You must interrogate their intentions, but we don't do that. We don't do that so much, do we, here? Okay, so I want to skip the DRC and the Nigeria story. I think we will do that probably tomorrow. Another issue to do with France and its former colonies. So the French Minister of Armed Forces was in Abidjan yesterday in Ivory Coast, and France is there to pledge to boost military support. France, do you ever learn? Do you ever learn? Or you must fight not to lose your influence in this continent by all means necessary. By now you would think France has proper advisors to its leadership, that they will know that these strategies that they have been using to as part of their diplomacy, you know, in diplomacy there's what we call the military diplomacy, and France has been using that a lot, especially in the Sahel region. I was just explaining to you, its military was in Burkina Faso, its military was in Mali. They've all vacated there, but they're still in other countries. So France, as part of its foreign policy, it has been engaging in military diplomacy, and that is not working well. France, case studies from all these countries that we're seeing now are blaming you, or are saying you're inadequate in how you're even offering. In your presence there is not making any difference. The presence of your troops there is not making any difference. So this military diplomacy is not working, France. If you want to engage with Ivory Coast, and you're here now promising military support, and you probably will boost, you maybe bring your military to Ivory Coast, it is just a matter of time before something goes wrong there, or maybe the government is toppled. I don't know, I pray not. Or maybe a new leadership comes that does not agree with your presence there. So military diplomacy is something that perhaps you need to leave alone and look for other ways that you explore your foreign policy. This military diplomacy is not working. And I'm shocked that you haven't learned anything yet in this African continent. You're still going to Abidjan a few days after you've been vacated from Ouagadougou. So you're going to Abidjan and you're there promising to boost military support to the Ivory Coast. And Francis adjusts its strategy to West Africa after Burkina Faso ordered its troops to leave. It was just maybe 2 days after that, and France went right ahead to Abidjan and to Ivory Coast and try to offer the similar support. French President Emmanuel Macron is due to visit Sub-Saharan Africa in early March. He's been here. Last year, I don't know, he was in Africa, I don't know how many times. Why is Africa? Well, I will not even ask that question because I think by now you already know. I wanted to ask, why is Africa so important to France? Then, ding, ding, I remembered. Africa is carrying France's economy on its back. That is why Africa is important to France, so it has to keep coming here. This is where France gets its raw materials. This is where France is getting a huge part of its income. So, of course, we are important for France, those countries that, especially the former colonies. So that's why France, Emmanuel Macron, has to make all these trips. In Europe, he is the leader who has, I think, visited Africa the most in the last even, say, 2 years. Emmanuel Macron is always in this continent. Why? Your presence here is not making any difference, and the strategies you're using is not making any difference. Now, this is what France says, that the army of Côte d'Ivoire has nothing to do with that of 10 years ago, and that for now it makes Côte d'Ivoire a country of stability, a country in which we can feed and document a common security agenda, and thus the role of regional power of balance is increasingly established. Basically, we are going to run on 2 legs, a leg that could be described as a human resource, training the ability for the French army to bring even more to its Ivorian partner, with obviously training modules on which we have the opportunity to express ourselves. So that is what this, what was this person, the French Minister of Armed Forces, his name is Sébastien Lecornu. That is what he said. He pledged that is going to help in training the army of Ivory Coast and all these things. That is well and good. I think there has been some cooperation and there have been some exchange of information and training and all that between different countries. So that is really not strange. I mean, we have British camps across Kenya, so really that is not strange. And there's bilateral agreements that countries enter, which is fine as long as both countries are at an understanding. But it is this continued, consistent effort with France using this military diplomacy that keeps failing. And I wish it could find other means and ways to engage with these countries that it desperately still needs to engage with, for its own good. Those methods you've been using, France, is not working. You have to craft other means and ways to have your diplomacy with Africa, and specifically with your former colonies. But this angle of military diplomacy, that is failing, and is failing fast, and it appears you don't really learn. And maybe what you should get from these countries is that they might not be needing France in that. And even if you're offering this military support, then it has to come in ways where you allow these countries also to take charge of some of these things, and to perhaps do what they're supposed to be doing for their country, and just offer a bit of some support, but from a distance, not bring your military like you did in Mali, and they overstayed their visit, obviously, after the first invite they had under a certain president. I've forgotten his name, when the militant activities were just beginning in Mali. And when you were done, you stayed over. And that now, for the people who had initially welcomed you as a savior, as a person who brought them security, your presence there now became an eyesore, because it appears now that you wanted to take over their country, and that's why they turned against you. So you have to understand, and you must have a strategy and an exit strategy, particularly, and say, this is what we want, this is how we're going to operate, and this is how long we intend to stay here and to help you and help out. But that doesn't seem to be what France is normally key on doing. It just wants to stay over and just overstay, and that has been a problem. So even as it seeks to engage with the Ivory Coast, I would imagine that maybe it learned a few things from these other countries that are repulsive now, and it can employ some of these lessons so that it understands its limitations and it understands where it should not be overstepping, and just give the help that is required and just let the country take care of itself. But still, I don't think this is a great move for France, and soon we might start seeing Ivorians on the streets marching against the French troops there. So President Emmanuel Macron, you must be very careful in how you choose to use this military diplomacy, because we've seen how it has backfired. So you might want to use a different kind of a strategy and approach, even as you seek to help Ivory Coast there. Okay, I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's just about 42 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi. A very good morning, good evening, and I trust that your day is going on well. Thank you so much. I'll see you here tomorrow, God willing, 10 a.m. East African time. My name is Miriam Ogoto. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.